It was a dark and stormy night at St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital, where Nurse Emily had to face the daunting task of working alone. She had volunteered for the night shift, hoping to earn some extra money and avoid the chaos of the day. But as she walked through the gloomy hallways, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The only sounds that broke the silence were the occasional thunderclaps and the faint whispers of the patients who were locked in their cells. Some of them were mumbling incoherently, others were crying out in agony, and a few were laughing maniacally. Nurse Emily tried to ignore them, but she could not help feeling a sense of dread and curiosity. What horrors had driven these people to madness? What secrets did they hide in their tormented minds? She wondered if she would ever find out, or if she would become one of them. As she entered Ward C, Emily saw Maria, one of the most quiet and harmless patients in the hospital. She was sitting on the floor, curled up in a fetal position, facing the wall. Emily approached her with a friendly smile and said hello, hoping to elicit some response. But Maria did not acknowledge her presence. She just stared blankly at the wall, as if she was in a trance. Emily noticed that Maria's white gown was stained with something dark and sticky. She assumed it was blood, either from a wound or a menstrual cycle. She felt sorry for her, but she also felt a bit uneasy. She wondered what had happened to Maria and why she was acting so strangely. She decided to leave her alone and moved on to the next patient. But as she did, she heard a faint whisper from behind her. As the night deepened and the hospital plunged into an eerie silence, Emily's senses became acutely aware of unsettling peculiarities. Patient whispers, which were once indistinct murmurs, now seemed to coalesce into a disconcerting symphony, resonating through the sterile halls and sending shivers down her spine. The flickering overhead lights cast elongated shadows that clung persistently to the edges of her vision, creating a disorienting dance that heightened her anxiety. The air, once clinically still, now carried a palpable tension, thick with unspoken foreboding. It was as if the very atmosphere within the psychiatric hospital had transformed, becoming a breeding ground for an impending sense of dread that Emily couldn't shake off. The silence of the night was broken by a loud, terrifying scream that made Emily jump in her seat. She recognized it as the voice of one of the nurses who worked in the same wing as her. She ran towards the source of the sound, hoping to find and help her co-worker. But what she saw at the end of the hallway was beyond her worst nightmares. The patient, who had somehow managed to free himself from his restraints, was standing over the nurse's body, holding a bloody scalpel in his hand. The patient's eyes were wide and wild, and his mouth was curved in a ghastly grin. The nurse's throat had been slit and blood was spreading across the floor. The patient looked at Emily and broke into unrestrained laughter. Emily felt a rush of horror and disgust and turned away from the gruesome sight. She rushed to the nearest phone, hoping to call for backup and security. But when she picked up the receiver, she heard nothing but static. She tried dialing the emergency number, but the line was dead. The girl realized that someone or something had disabled the communication system, leaving her alone and defenseless in the middle of a nightmare. Emily felt a surge of despair and fear, wondering if there was anyone else alive in the hospital. She decided to try to find a way out, or at least a safe place to hide. She made her way through the dark and confusing corridors, where every door seemed to hold a new horror. She saw patients wandering around, some of them armed with weapons, some of them disfigured and mutilated, some of them chanting and singing in unfamiliar languages. She saw dead or dying staff members, their bodies torn apart, burned, or poisoned. She saw signs of struggle and carnage, but no sign of a rational explanation. Finally, she saw what she thought was a well-protected security room. Quickly running in, she forced the door with what she could and approached the surveillance screen. Emily was transfixed by the horrifying scenes that played on the security screens in front of her. She watched in disbelief as the patients, who had somehow escaped from their cells, attacked and killed the hospital staff with brutal force. She recognized some of the victims as her colleagues and friends, who had dedicated their lives to helping the mentally ill. But now they were lying in pools of blood, their faces twisted in agony and fear. The patients, on the other hand, showed no signs of remorse or emotion. They moved like zombies, driven by a mysterious and malevolent power that had taken over their minds. They seemed to have a single goal: to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. Emily realized that she was one of them, and that she had to get out of there as fast as possible. But she was trapped in the dark and isolated office, with no way of contacting the outside world. She felt a surge of panic and despair, as she wondered if anyone would come to rescue her, or if she would die alone in this hellish place. She decided to make a run for it, hoping to find an exit or a hiding spot. She grabbed a flashlight and a pair of scissors and opened the door. She stepped into the dimly lit corridor, where the only light came from the flickering bulbs that hung from the ceiling. She felt like she had entered a nightmare where the boundaries between reality and madness were blurred. She saw shadows moving on the walls, as if they were mocking and taunting her. She heard whispers in her ears, as if they were trying to drive her insane. She heard footsteps behind her, as if they were chasing her. She ran for her life, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up with her. She prayed for a miracle, but she knew it was hopeless. Emily felt a rush of panic as she heard loud banging and cracking coming from the other side of the door. She glanced quickly at the monitors and saw the horrifying sight of patients running out of their cells and violently smashing the door with chairs, pipes, and anything else they could get their hands on. Their eyes were filled with fear and madness, and she knew they wouldn't stop until they got to her. She jumped up from her seat and backed away from the door, hoping it would hold. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she was trapped and alone. The only sound in the room was the deafening noise of patients screaming and crying, echoing in her ears. But suddenly everything stopped. Everything went silent except for one thing: a quiet horse breathing right behind her. She felt cold breath on her neck and a hand on her shoulder. She turned around and saw something that made her cry out in horror. It wasn't a patient, but something else. Something that was hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. When she turned around, she saw Maria, a smile on her face. Tom worked as a janitor at the Starlight cinema, a rundown and old-fashioned movie theater that barely had any customers. The theater showed mostly horror and thriller movies, but they were not very popular or scary. Tom hated working the night shift, but he needed the money to pay his rent. He lived in a small and shabby apartment, and he had no family or friends to support him. He usually finished work by midnight, then went home and watched TV until he fell asleep. He had a boring and lonely life, and he dreamed of something more exciting and meaningful. One night he was sweeping the floors in the lobby, humming some tune to himself. He liked to listen to music while he worked, but the theater's sound system was broken, so he had to make do with his own voice. Suddenly he heard a loud scream coming from one of the theaters. He stopped and looked around, wondering if anyone was still inside. He looked at his watch and saw that it was 11:45 p.m. The last show had ended an hour ago, and he had locked the doors after the last visitor had left. He was sure that he was the only person in the theater, but the scream sounded real and human. He felt a surge of fear and curiosity, and he decided to investigate. He grabbed a broom and headed towards the theater where the scream had come from, hoping to find out what was going on. He decided to go and see if anyone had snuck in and was watching a horror movie. He took a flashlight from his pocket and headed towards the movie theater where he had heard the scream. He opened the door and saw that the screen was still on, showing a dark and grainy image. He couldn't make out what it was, but it looked like camera footage. He walked down the aisle, shining his flashlight on the seats. There was no one in sight, just popcorn and soda cups scattered on the floor. He reached the front row and looked at the screen. He gasped as he realized what he was seeing. It was him. It was a video of him working in the lobby, sweeping the floors, humming some tune. It was a video of him taken from a hidden camera without his knowledge or consent. It was a video of him being watched by someone or something that had lured him into the theater with a scream. It was a video of him in danger. On the large cinema screen, a live feed from a concealed camera in the audience displayed Tom's every step into the movie theater. His own visage, pallid and stricken with fear, loomed back at him. A voice, eerie and distorted, emanated from the speakers. "Hello, Tom. I've been observing you for an extended period. I know the ins and outs of your life. Where you reside, where you toil, your daily routines. You're a dull, pitiable individual, Tom, devoid of friends, family, or love. You're a drain on existence, Tom. And tonight, I'm putting an end to your suffering." Tom's forehead dampened with a cold sweat. He frantically scanned the surroundings, attempting to pinpoint the origin of the ominous voice. A blinking red light in the ceiling's corner caught his eye. It dawned on him that it was yet another camera, and the realization struck that more of these covert watchers likely lurked throughout the theater. An uneasy gulp emphasized the lump forming in his throat as the disconcerting truth settled. He was under relentless scrutiny. The haunting voice persisted, its words carving a chilling path down Tom's spine. He staggered backward, the flashlight in his hand quivering. An oppressive air enveloped the theater, the very walls seeming to constrict around him. With each uttered phrase, the distorted voice delved into the recesses of Tom's life, laying bare intimate details only a person harboring sinister intentions could possess. Fear tightened its grip, prompting Tom to fumble for his phone, desperate to summon the police. Mocking chuckles from the voice accompanied an ominous soundtrack, intensifying his torment. "Tom, feel free to call for help. However, I assure you, escape is a luxury you won't attain tonight. I meticulously orchestrated this plan, and you're not leaving," the voice grinned malevolently. Tom's trembling fingers dialed 911. Desperation etched across his face as he pleaded for help. However, the relentless voice from the speakers escalated, drowning out his cries for assistance. A foreboding red light blinked ominously, capturing every nuance of Tom's futile attempts to escape. In the passing minutes, the theater transformed into a nightmarish confinement. Tom's struggles were in vain. The concealed cameras granted the masked tormentor an unnerving foresight into his every move. The once piercing screams gave way to sinister, ghostly laughter, reverberating through the vacant seats. The arrival of the police, marked by flashing headlights casting eerie shadows, brought a glimmer of hope. Their flashlights methodically combed through the rows of seats, searching for Tom. Abruptly, a video feed from one of the hidden cameras materialized on the screen, revealing Tom donning the same chilling mask. Tom's trembling fingers dialed 911. Desperation etched across his face as he pleaded for help. However, the relentless voice from the speakers escalated, drowning out his cries for assistance. A foreboding red light blinked ominously, capturing every nuance of Tom's futile attempts to escape. In the passing minutes, the theater transformed into a nightmarish confinement. Tom's struggles were in vain. The concealed cameras granted the masked tormentor an unnerving foresight into his every move. The once piercing screams gave way to sinister, ghostly laughter, reverberating through the vacant seats. The arrival of the police, marked by flashing headlights casting eerie shadows, brought a glimmer of hope. Their flashlights methodically combed through the rows of seats, searching for Tom. Abruptly, a video feed from one of the hidden cameras materialized on the screen, revealing Tom donning the same chilling mask. The public library, which was usually a quiet place for books and solitude, turned into an eerie and mysterious place during the night shift. The librarian, whose name was Henry, was a diligent and curious man who loved his job. He enjoyed sorting and cataloging books and discovering new and interesting titles. But that night he made a disturbing discovery that puzzled and alarmed him. Some books had disappeared from their shelves without any trace or explanation. Intrigued and a little frightened, Henry decided to follow the trail left by the missing books, which he thought pointed to the dimly lit basement of the library. The basement, which was usually used to store old and rare books, had a secret door that Henry had never noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a secret passage leading into the dark and sinister underground library. Henry felt a strange and irresistible urge to explore the hidden library, even though he sensed that something was wrong. He took a flashlight and a book and set off into the unknown. The underground library was a bizarre and mesmerizing sight, filled with ancient books with strange and mysterious symbols on them. The books looked old and valuable, and Henry wondered what secrets they contained. There was an eerie silence in the air, however, and it seemed to Henry that he was the only living soul in this hidden place. As he looked through the books, he felt a cold and piercing stare on his back, as if someone or something was watching him. He also heard a faint and incomprehensible whispering in his ears, as if someone or something was trying to communicate with him. He felt a rush of fear and curiosity, and he wanted to get away as soon as possible. He turned around and ran back to the secret door, hoping it was still open. When he saw that the door was still ajar, he was relieved and quickly slipped through it. He slammed the door behind him and hoped it would never open again. His relief was short-lived, however, as he saw a group of hooded figures standing in front of him. They looked like a cult, and an ominous and threatening aura emanated from them. They blocked his path and seemed to have evil intentions. Henry reacted quickly and dodged the figures. He ran upstairs and locked the basement door. He hoped it would scare them away, but he wasn't sure. He wondered who they were and what they wanted. He wondered if they had anything to do with the missing books and the underground library. He wondered if he had stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. He wondered if he was in danger. Faced with an otherworldly experience that defied all logic, the librarian, shaken but determined to find out the truth, pulled out his phone and dialed 911. They arrived 15 minutes after the call at 2:35. He told of a mysterious underground library they had discovered in the basement and an encounter with hooded men who had appeared out of nowhere. The librarian faced skepticism and disbelief from the police officers, who decided they were either lying or hallucinating. Unable to bear the disbelief, the librarian insisted that the policemen escort them back to the basement, where they hoped to show them evidence of their strange adventure. To their horror, however, they discovered that the secret door that had led them into the underground library had disappeared, leaving no trace of either the mysterious and enigmatic place or its unusual and sinister visitors. When the police left, dismissing the librarian's story as a figment of their imagination, the librarians were left alone in the basement, pondering the disturbing events that had taken place. They didn't know if they had stumbled upon a supernatural phenomenon beyond their comprehension, or if they had simply succumbed to a surreal hallucination brought on by their curiosity. Henry decided to distract himself and picked up one of the books from the shelf, thinking it was all just a hallucination. But as soon as he opened the book, on the first page was a drawing that looked like a child's drawing. There was a boy whose clothes looked exactly like Henry's. The scariest part was that underneath the drawing was something written in red: 3 o'clock.